That morning, in the packed Marin courtroom, my son-in-law stood up, pointed his finger at my face, and spoke clearly before the television cameras. He's old and senile. We just want to protect the family's assets. The whole courtroom laughed. They thought I was a confused old man about to be placed under legal guardianship by my own daughter and son-in-law, but they didn't know that the man they were mocking was once called the Scalpel, the coldest blade of the Department of Justice. I had sliced through hundreds of money laundering cases and exposed corporations that hid fraud behind polished words. And this time, I was performing one last operation on my own family. They thought I would bow my head and sign their papers. I chose to sign something else, the order reclaiming their assets. If you have ever been looked down upon, ever been forced out of the very life you built, remember this. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it simply means you are sharpening your blade, waiting for justice to open its eyes. Leave a single dot in the comments if you too believe that real justice does not need to shout. It only needs to be placed in the right hands. And if you want to hear more true stories about people who dared to rise again and balance their lives with truth and dignity, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because here we tell stories where justice doesn't walk in with handcuffs, but with a pen, a signature, and an unbroken heart. That Monday morning, light rain coated the courthouse steps in Marin County, and wind from the bay carried the scent of floor wax, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of old hallways. I walked slowly, holding the black leather briefcase that had followed me through 3 decades as an investigator. Today it came back, not to crack a case, but to defend myself. Outside room 3B, my daughter Claire was smiling and chatting with local reporters. She wore a beige suit, her heels clacking against the tile. When she saw me, she turned, smirking slightly. "Did you remember to take your pills this morning?" she said loudly enough for the bailiff to hear. The reporter grinned. A camera clicked. I saw my reflection in the lens. An old man with silver hair, sunken eyes, and a dark suit. Grant, her husband, stepped out behind her, phone in hand, voice louder than the hallway speakers. "Don't let the old man wander off again. We're here to save him from ruining what's left of the estate." The strangers around them, including a young lawyer with stubble, chuckled. I just nodded, tightening my grip on the handle. In my head still echoed what Claire had told me the week before. "Dad, let Grant handle the finances. Your time is over." They thought I was blind to the world, forgetting that a man who once hunted federal con artists doesn't need sharp eyes to spot a lie. The bailiff opened the door. Case 19-4. 1-2, Marwick Guardianship. Everyone entered. Grant sat close beside Claire. His chair turned slightly toward me as if to assert dominance. He pulled a paper from his folder, laid it on the table, and muttered just loud enough for 2 people in the row ahead to hear, "He signs everything. Once he sells the house, he'll probably give the money to stray cats." Laughter rippled. Claire covered her mouth, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Judge Catherine Lowe entered, her black robe rippling in the breeze from the air vent. Everyone rose. I glanced at the wall clock, running 2 minutes slow. Justice here always moves slower than time itself. When the clerk called my name, Claire leaned forward and said loudly, "Your Honor, my father once got lost and drove to Santa Rosa at midnight." I looked at her. "That was the night your mother died. I went to bring home her ashes." The courtroom fell silent for a second. She turned away, pretending to grab a tissue. Grant sneered, adding, "Your Honor, he doesn't even remember who his ex-wife is or who the banker was. I had to help him sign papers like a child." That line was enough to make several heads lift from their files. Judge Lowe raised her hand. "Silence." She opened the background file I'd submitted. Her eyes stopped at the bold line. The atmosphere shifted. "Mr. Marwick, formerly the Scalpel of the DOJ?" she asked slowly and clearly, as if placing a surgical knife on a steel table. A stir went through the room. They all knew that name. the man who had dissected countless laundering and fraud schemes with numbers instead of blades. The nickname didn't refer to medicine, but to the precision with which he cut through ledgers to expose real money trails. Across the aisle, Grant arched his brows. Claire's mouth fell open, and their lawyer stammered, Your Honor, do you mean? He once led a federal financial fraud task force, correct, Mr. Marwick? Yes, I replied evenly. But today I'm here to prove one thing. The one pretending to be insane isn't me. The room went still. The clock ticked once. Grant swallowed hard, pressing his lips together, while Claire hurriedly lowered her phone under the table, deleting a message whose glow I still caught. He knows. Change plan. I didn't smile. I just looked straight at the judge and said quietly, as if dictating a statement, Your Honor, they're trying to seize $8 million. Money I earned while they were still learning how to say thank you. Judge Lowe paused her pen, raising an eyebrow. In the corner, the same reporter from before had already set down a recorder. Claire tried to pull his arm, but another click sounded. Grant's voice shook. You're slandering your own daughter. I turned to him, my tone calm. No, I'm giving her back something I once taught her. Honesty. She lost it. Claire's face went pale, her hand trembling. Their attorney cleared his throat, struggling to regain rhythm. Your Honor, my clients only wish to protect their father, who shows signs of memory decline. Avery, my lawyer, stood and cut in. Mr. Marwick's memory is sharp enough to recall the date and time of every unauthorized withdrawal and every forged signature at Horizon Bank. The evidence will be presented in the next session. Judge Lowe tilted her head. Noted. Preliminary hearing adjourned for 5 minutes. She rose. As everyone left their seats, Grant passed close behind me and whispered, Your little scalpel trick doesn't scare anyone, old man. I turned slightly. Maybe not. But when a blade has cut through the records of men like you, it doesn't need to scare. Grant said nothing. Claire turned, about to speak, but the judge's gaze caught the bracelet on her wrist, engraved with her mother's name, shining like proof. I sat down, opened my case, and placed the first sheet of evidence on the table. Every line of ink as sharp as a blade, because it was time for the scalpel to return. When the opposing lawyer began declaring he's no longer mentally sound, I stopped listening. My mind was replaying one night, the night they started treating me like I was useless. I remember that night. At the mansion of Grant and Claire in Presidio Heights, overlooking the entire Marina district, the yellow light spilled through the wide glass panes like a performance without an audience. On the long walnut dining table, crystal wine glasses sparkled, silverware aligned perfectly, and in the center stood a vase of white orchids that Claire said she had borrowed from her husband's law office. Everything was flawless until I sat down. Grant stood at the head of the table, white shirt unbuttoned at the top, holding a glass of red wine, his voice raised just enough for everyone to hear. First, thank you all for coming. Tonight isn't just a family dinner. It's a chance to talk about the new direction of the Marwick estate, or rather, how we can protect it from poor decisions. Soft laughter rippled. A few discreet glances turned toward me. The old man sitting at the end of the table, silent like an antique in a lavish room. Claire sat to Grant's right, her smile diplomatic. I recognized that look. Not shame, but silent complicity. Grant continued, setting his glass down with a sharp clack. Dad, I know you were great once, but that was another time. Finance isn't about pencils and notebooks anymore. It's about algorithms and speed. If you don't let us manage things, this family will lose everything in a few months. He didn't look at me as he spoke. His eyes were fixed on the iPad screen flashing stock charts. I smiled faintly, turning the glass of water in front of me. I worked with notebooks for 40 years, Grant, and with those same notebooks, I exposed more than 200 fraud cases. No algorithm needed. He looked up and smirked. Sure, Dad, you're a legend, but legends should rest. Old things should know when to step aside, so the next generation doesn't have to clean up the mess. Across the table, one of his associates, a real estate broker named Hayden, chimed in, "Mr. Marwick, I heard you used to work for the DOJ. Then I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of financial incompetence at 70. Laughter broke out around the table. Claire lowered her head, smiling faintly. The clinking of silverware against porcelain rang in my ears like drops of metal. Grant raised his glass, voice tinged with mockery. "Come on, don't be hard on Dad. Last year he even called the bank to ask for his own password again." I looked at him, the light reflected in his eyes, part wine, part deceit, because that was the day I realized someone was withdrawing money. Grant laughed louder. "Are you implying your daughter, old man?" Claire interjected softly. "Grant, don't say that." But he kept laughing, patting her hand, joking, "Relax, honey, he's just reliving his detective days. Turns typos into crimes. Maybe he'll call the FBI tomorrow." The men at the table laughed. Someone toasted, "Cheers to the FBI." I said nothing. I listened to the slicing of meat, the pouring of wine, the shuffle of shoes, sounds colliding like metal in an operation. Claire avoided my eyes, but her hand trembled as she refilled her glass. I glanced around the room. On the wall hung a photo from Napa Valley, taken right after her mother's death. Claire smiling brightly, and me in the corner, half my shoulder cut from the frame. In that picture, I had probably already been erased from the family without realizing it. Grant leaned back, refilling his glass. "Dad, I'm negotiating with the city council for a Presidio Ridge development project. If you sign the power of attorney tonight, I guarantee triple returns. Don't make people think you're blocking progress." I looked at him, my tone calm. "And if you fail, who takes responsibility?" He shrugged. "Then we'll sell the Sonoma house. It's not worth much anyway." The air chilled. Claire set her knife down with a faint clang. I asked, "That house? Do you remember who built it?" She stayed silent. Grant cut in, "It's just a house. No need for sentimentality. Money keeps families together, not old wooden walls." I leaned back, nodding. "You're right. Money keeps the house, but only respect keeps the roof." The table fell silent for a few seconds before Hayden forced a nervous laugh. "Hard to beat you at philosophy, sir." Grant rested his elbow on the table, voice low. "Dad, don't turn dinner into a sermon. Everyone here understands. You need a guardian, and I'm just trying to help." "Help?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he said, pouring wine to the brim of my glass, his tone deliberate. "Help. You stop signing the wrong will." The glass slid toward me, red, cold, gleaming. All eyes watched. Claire looked down. I stared into the glass and said, "Do you know the difference between wine and blood, Grant? Wine makes people laugh. Blood doesn't." No one laughed. I stood up, leaving the glass untouched. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Thank you for dinner. It reminded me of what I taught wrong." Grant fired back, his tone hard as metal. "Taught wrong? No, Dad, you just forgot that the one paying for dinner is the one who gets to speak." I paused at the doorway, looking at my daughter, the same girl who once held my hand at her graduation. Claire avoided my gaze. "You forgot who bought this table, who built it with his own hands." I stepped out into the drizzle. On Presidio Heights Road, car headlights reflected against the glass facade. I saw myself in it. Older, silent, but undefeated. Through the wind, I heard a familiar sound, the scalpel touching the steel tray, signaling the operation wasn't over yet. After that night, I knew they wouldn't stop. And indeed, 3 days after that dinner, Grant showed up at my doorstep. No wine this time, just a stack of papers and the smile of a man who thought he was smarter than the one who taught him how to read contracts. I was making coffee in my small house on Pine Street when the doorbell rang. 3 short chimes, 1 long, the pattern only one person ever used, Grant. I looked through the frosted glass. He stood there in a long coat, holding a brown leather briefcase. his expression feigning calm. I opened the door, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with rain-damp wind. "Morning already, and you're not at the office?" I asked. He smiled. I thought it was time we talked like two men, not like a father and his son-in-law. He stepped inside, glancing around the house, the home I'd kept since Isabel was alive. The wedding photo still hung in the corner, the linen curtains still tied neatly as always. Grant looked at them briefly, then placed his briefcase on the table. "You got 5 minutes?" I sat down on the wooden chair, turning my coffee cup slowly. "Your 5 minutes usually cost more than that." He chuckled, pulling out a bundle of papers. "I didn't come to argue. I came with an investment offer. My new project, Silver Mesa Residences, is opening its final funding round. I want you to contribute $500,000. Just sign. I'll handle everything else." I said nothing, only looked at the paper with his company's logo, Thorne and Brooks Development. Below it, bold text read, "Projected ROI, 220% in 24 months. Numbers polished like gold-plated toys." I asked slowly, "Where is Silver Mesa?" He smiled, pulling out his phone and showing a 3D rendering. "South of Santa Rosa, right at the entrance to Silver Mesa Canyon. Luxury resort, villas, golf course, artificial lake. One of California's most promising parcels." I looked closely, then spoke softly. "I know this terrain. That area used to belong to the leasehold of Marwick Holdings, didn't it?" Grant straightened, pausing slightly. "Yes? Well, yeah, but that was a 99-year lease. It's old. Nobody cares about that now." I set the coffee cup down. "A 99-year lease. From whom, Grant?" He gave a stiff smile. "Just some old family company." I looked him straight in the eye. "That company is called Marwick Trust Properties, LLC, and the person holding that lease is me." He froze, sweat beading on his forehead. The air in the room thickened. I didn't raise my voice, just said quietly, "You just invited me to invest in the very land you're renting from me." He swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "You're misunderstanding, Dad. I was just planning to renew the lease for easier liquidity. Besides, you don't really have time to deal with paperwork anymore." Paperwork? I opened the drawer and pulled out a notarized copy of the original lease, stamped Sonoma County, dated April 26th, 1998. "You recognize this?" Grant stared at the paper as if it were a loaded gun. I continued. "Clause 12, Section B. If the lessee redevelops the property without notifying the owner, the contract becomes void, and all benefits revert to the lessor." He lifted his head, trying to regain his confidence. "Are you threatening me?" "No. I'm reminding you to read the fine print, the one I wrote 25 years ago." He stood, gripping his briefcase. "You know, the world's changed. No one cares about those dusty old clauses anymore." My tone stayed low and steady. The world may change, but signatures still hold legal weight. What you call outdated is what keeps people honest. Grant strode toward the door, but before leaving, he turned and said through clenched teeth, "If you think you can stop me, remember, this whole family, including Claire, wants to move forward. You can't hold on to the past forever." I didn't get up. "Some things don't belong to the past, Grant. They're just waiting for someone foolish enough to touch them." The door shut. I looked at the cup of coffee, now cold, the steam gone. In my mind, I retraced the Silver Mesa map. Every forest edge, every boundary I had measured myself. Grant wasn't just deceitful. He had just tied the rope around his own neck. I opened another drawer and pulled out an old USB stick, labeled Lease Original Scan 98. I plugged it into my laptop. A blue light blinked. On the screen appeared the first line of the contract. "For land, does not forget who owns it." I smiled. Out there, Grant might be confident among glass towers and polished words. But he had forgotten one truth. Every financial game has roots, and those roots are still held by the man he tried to humiliate. I shut the laptop and looked out the window. The rain kept falling, the scent of wet earth mixing with cold coffee. In that quiet, I could feel every pulse in my hands beat slow and steady. The man once known as the Scalpel didn't need to shout. He only needed one signature and one mistake. And Grant had just made his first. That night, wind from the bay blew back toward the city, cold enough for frost to gather white on the window of my Pine Street home. I sat at my desk, reopening the old Silver Mesa lease file, my chest trembling like a drawn wire. The line Clause 12, B, blurred on the ink-faded page as a sharp pain crawled across my left chest. At first, I thought it was just muscle strain from coffee being too strong. But then my hands shook, breath shortened, heart pounding like someone striking a hammer inside my ribs. I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing a deep breath. The phone lay only a few steps away, yet the distance felt as long as Lombard Hill. I dialed Claire's number. The phone rang. Her familiar voice came through slightly husky. "Dad, I'm in a meeting. What is it?" My words broke between breaths. "I feel short of breath. Might need to go to the hospital." Silence on the other end. I heard keyboard clicks. Someone calling, "Claire, they're waiting for you in the conference room." Then my daughter said quietly, "Can you call an Uber, Dad? I'm busy. If it's serious, text me later." I froze, staring at the dimming screen. Only the click of the call ending echoed. The empty room amplified the ticking wall clock to something unbearable. I sat still for a few seconds, then opened the Uber app. The car arrived 8 minutes later. I locked the door, slipping a small photo of Isabel, my wife, into my wallet. The driver, a young man in his 20s, played soft music. "You're heading to UCSF Medical Center, right?" I nodded. Streetlights slid past the window like sharp blades of light. Each turn made me feel every uneven beat in my chest. On the car's GPS, the glowing text read, "ETA 7 minutes." 7 minutes. Just enough time for a father to realize he had become a burden in the tragedy his own family had written. At the emergency room, a nurse helped me out of the car, voice brisk. "Left chest? How long has it hurt?" I answered. 10 minutes. She placed me on a stretcher, attaching electrodes and threading an IV. The scent of antiseptic filled my nose, cold and metallic. When the doctor asked, "Is anyone here with you?" I smiled. "No, they're in a meeting." That sentence weighed heavily on my chest, then the pain itself. On the hospital bed, after nitroglycerin eased my heart, I opened my wallet and looked at Isabel's photo, taken in the Sonoma vineyard. Her eyes in that picture were still the same, gentle, trusting, asking nothing. I whispered, "This time, I'll operate on my own family." I smiled faintly, though my eyes burned. Outside the window, the ICU nightlight cast a pale yellow streak across the ceiling, like a scalpel slicing through the dark. In my mind, faces from Presidio Heights appeared. Claire, Grant, their laughter, their contempt, all blending with the slow, precise beeps of the monitor. A nurse came to check on me, asking softly, "Would you like me to call your family?" I shook my head. "No need. I've been here hundreds of times. The only difference is I used to come to prove others were lying. Tonight, I came to prove I'm still alive." She didn't understand, but smiled anyway, adjusting the blanket. When she left, I looked up. Each fluorescent tube above looked like a long incision. Light, cold, but exact. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. In a drifting dream, I saw Isabel standing in the vineyard, holding a small notebook, calling me home. But between us stood a tall fence with no gate. Her voice faded. "You know how to open it, don't you?" I woke with a chill of sweat, and I knew. She meant the gate of justice I had closed when I left the DOJ. Now it had to be opened once more. At dawn, the doctor told me my heart was stable. I thanked him and refused the ambulance ride home. I stood, detached the monitor leads, and put on my coat. Stepping outside, the cold air cut like a blade, yet I breathed easier than ever. Perhaps because for the first time in years, I knew exactly what needed to be operated on. Not the body, but the abandoned heart of a family. That afternoon, when I returned from UCSF, the little house on Pine Street still smelled faintly of antiseptic on my coat. I was about to make coffee when I heard paper slide under the door. A large cream envelope lay on the floor, corner stamped with the red seal of Marin County, Family Division. My heart sank, not from fear, but from a premonition. This was the next act of the play I had seen unfold at the Presidio Heights dinner. I opened the envelope, and the pages slipped out. The first page bore the bold heading, Petition for Temporary Guardianship, Jonas Marwick. Below it was the signature of Claire Marwick Thorne and Grant Thorne. I read each line, my eyes steady but my hand trembling a little. The subject, Jonas Marwick, 70 years old, exhibits temporary memory impairment, reduced capacity for financial judgment, engages in self-endangering behavior, and poses a risk of asset dissipation. At the end, they wrote, to ensure the safety and stability of the family assets, the petitioners, the biological daughter Claire, request the court appoint emergency guardianship, granting the petitioner full authority to manage the subject's assets and bank accounts. The wording was cold and clinical, like an audit report. Each line of black ink felt like a cut. Under the attachments, there was a name I could not ignore. Medical certification, Dr. Peter Lynn, DDS. I frowned. DDS is Doctor of Dental Surgery, a dentist, not a psychiatrist. I remembered the name. In 2016, when I was still consulting for the DOJ, I had read the disciplinary file on Dr. Peter Lynn, who had his license revoked for falsifying prescriptions for controlled substances and forging medical certifications in an insurance case, and now he appeared in my diagnostic paperwork, like a blunt scalpel being reused. I opened my laptop and accessed the California Dental Board license database. The red line appeared immediately. License revoked, March 18, 2017. Right below it, subject involved in falsified medical documentation case, under investigation by DOJ. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, and smiled softly. Clearly, they did not only want to strip my dignity, they wanted to legitimize it with forged papers. I pulled Isabel's photo from my wallet and placed it beside the file. See, now they use the law itself to bind me. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, dividing the room into light and shadow, like an operating table splitting patient and surgeon. I opened the old file cabinet and took out a dossier labeled Case Lexington 04, Fraudulent Certification, Peter Lynn. The pages were yellowed, but enough to prove that the man had served as a false witness in at least 3 cases. I carefully placed them in my black leather briefcase and clipped in a copy of Claire's letter. When the wind tapped the window frame, I heard Judge Lowe's words from the courtroom echo in my head. The court will examine the reliability of the accompanying medical evidence. I smiled. Reliability? They had just handed me the evidence to dismantle their entire case. I opened the recorder and in a low, measured voice said, April 14th, I, Jonas Marwick, received a petition for emergency guardianship, signed by Claire and Grant Thorne. The attached medical evidence is from Dr. Peter Lynn, whose license was revoked in 2017. This is the opening of the counterfile. I saved the file as Evidence 01, Guardianship Fraud. Before turning out the light, I looked out the window. The city lay in fog, sirens drifting in the distance, cold and hollow. In the dark, I heard Isabel's memory. If they do not know when to stop, you must teach them using their own laws. I nodded. This time I will operate on my family, starting with a disbarred dentist. And so the operation began. No scalpel, no blood. Only signatures, data, and a silence sharper than any blade. 3 days after receiving the guardianship petition, I left San Francisco and drove up to the Sonoma Hill, the last remaining piece of memory Isabel and I had built together, the small vineyard behind the wooden house. The rusty iron gate still gave a clang when opened, the scent of damp earth and prairie wind rushing in, familiar enough to quiet my heart. Beneath that vineyard is a cellar I used to keep wine there. Now it would become the place where I would operate on the truth itself. I flipped the light on, and the cold tubular bulbs cast a blue-white glare over rows of old oak barrels, each barrel marked with its year in white chalk. In the center of the cellar, the steel table had replaced the wine table. On it sat a computer, some old USB drives, and a metal file drawer. I plugged in a USB labeled Scalpel Archives. The screen lit up and folders appeared. Financial fraud records, false witnesses, the Peter Lynn 2017 case. Everything I had done at the Department of Justice sat here, waiting for a click to bring it back to life. When Isabel was alive, she used to say, "Let the scalpel rest. We have enough peace." I kept that promise until my own daughter signed the papers to strip her father of his rights. I sat down and opened an email from Avery Hayes, my lawyer. She wrote, "Jonas, I checked Peter Lynn's file. He had his license revoked for falsifying medical reports for a company called Walsh Holdings. That company is now an investor in Thorne and Brooks Development, Grant's firm." I read it 3 times. The name Walsh Holdings brought back a memory. 15 years ago, I had investigated them in a real estate money laundering case. Now they appeared again in my story, and behind my son-in-law. I called Avery. "You see it?" "I do. Walsh paid Peter Lynn on several occasions for falsified documents. Now he testifies for Claire and Grant. There's a clear link. And if we can prove this payment came from Walsh this time as well, the entire guardianship petition will collapse." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "What do you plan to do?" "I will do what I have always done best, perform a clean operation." I shut the laptop, pulled the Silver Mesa land contract copy from the file cabinet, pinned a few new notes to it, and launched the bank transaction analysis software I used in investigations. On the screen, the lines crawled slowly, the blue light reflecting off the steel table. No need for arcane terms. I looked for the simplest thing, the money trail. It always leaves a trace, like dried blood on a scalpel. In less than an hour, I found it. A transfer of $12,500 from Walsh Holdings to Peter Lynn's account, 2 weeks before the guardianship petition was filed. I printed it and signed the corner of the page. First piece of evidence. Outside, the vineyard fell tonight, and the wind whistled through the cellar crack. I stood surveying the room, the smell of wood, of wine, and of cold steel mingling. It had been years since my hands felt this steady. I turned on the recorder in a low, deliberate voice. 18th of April. The wine cellar beneath the vineyard is hereby designated an investigative room. The scalpel is back. I set the device down and closed my eyes for a moment. In the dark, I heard Isabel whisper, "If they do not respect the law, then the law will judge them." I nodded softly. "I am doing that now." Above me, the vineyard remained peaceful, but below, in the earth, a blade had just been sharpened. That Saturday night, I sat in the wine cellar, the blue light from the screen reflecting off my aged face. Rain drummed on the cellar roof, each drop like the heartbeat of the sick body I was about to autopsy. I called this work a data autopsy, because instead of cadavers, I was dissecting my son-in-law's finances. I began reopening the emails Avery had pulled, not from anyone's personal mailbox, but from the legally extracted archive of Thorne and Brooks Development's servers, where Grant ran things. Every line was a financial artery: transfers, guarantees, bank statements. The name Walsh Holdings appeared more often than I'd thought. I traced IP addresses, auxiliary servers, skills people assumed I'd lost. But in truth, this was the work I'd lived by for 2 decades, tracing dirty money and reconstructing fraudulent financial networks for the Department of Justice. They called me the Scalpel, not for coldness, but because I knew exactly where to cut the hidden artery carrying illicit funds. Then a chain of emails surfaced. exchanged between Walsh Holdings' finance team and Grant. The subject line read, "Capital Call, Citadel Apex Capital." I paused. Citadel Apex was a large New York investment fund that specialized in bridge loans for underfunded real estate projects. I opened the email. In it, Citadel's finance department wrote to Grant, "Request for additional capital of $5 million within 10 days to sustain construction cash flow for Silver Mesa residences. If not completed, the project will be deemed in default under Clause 14.1. I leaned back and reread the number. $5 million in 10 days. An adrenaline shot he could not deliver. I kept tracing. Transaction data showed Silver Mesa had burned nearly $50 million in 12 months, mostly outside investor money, including funds from Walsh Holdings. I smiled softly. So their heart beats on the money of the dead. I opened my old leather notebook, started a new entry, and wrote with a black pen, "Pulse check, Silver Mesa, their heartbeats on borrowed money." I noted beneath, "Signs of heart failure, capital call $5 million default, signs of disorder, Citadel Apex Fund, underlying cause, Walsh Holdings supplied the counterfeit drug, Peter Lynn." I closed the book. For the first time in years, I felt like I was sitting in a real investigative room. But the patient was not a stranger on the street. The patient was my own family. I played a small speaker and listened to an old recording of Isabel reading a poem at our 10-year wedding celebration. Her voice was warm and distant. Some wounds do not need bandages, they need people to stop touching them. My throat tightened. I could no longer stop touching, because they had reopened the wound themselves. Then Avery called. "I just received a new statement, Jonas. Grant has mortgaged the Presidio Heights mansion as collateral to Citadel, but Citadel has halted disbursements." I asked, "Do you know what they do when a loan defaults?" "Sell the debt or foreclose on the property." "Exactly," I said, "and I will buy that debt. Prepare the paperwork for a shell company. The name will be Marwick Recovery Trust." A pause on the line. "You're really going to perform a cardiac operation, Jonas?" I smiled, voice low. "I'm only replacing the heart, and this time it will beat to the rhythm of justice." Outside, the rain eased. The cellar sank into silence, the server humming softly. On the screen, files still scrolled. I saved everything, labeled it Financial Autopsy. 01. Before shutting down, I looked at the last line I'd written in the notebook. "Pulse checked. Their hearts still beat, but with blood borrowed by loans. And I, the man who once held the blade, am about to stop it." The next afternoon, when I returned from UCSF, the little house on Pine Street still smelled faintly of antiseptic on my coat. I was about to make coffee when I heard paper slide under the door. A large cream envelope lay on the floor, its corner stamped with the red seal of Marin County. Family Division. My heart sank, not from fear, but from a premonition. This was the next act of the play I had seen unfold at the Presidio Heights dinner. I opened the envelope and the pages slipped out. The first page bore the bold heading, "Petition for Temporary Guardianship, Jonas Marwick," signed below by Claire Marwick Thorne and Grant Thorne. I read each line, my eyes steady but my hand trembling a little. The subject, Jonas Marwick, 70 years old, exhibits temporary memory impairment, reduced capacity for financial judgment, engages in self-endangering behavior, and poses a risk of asset dissipation. At the end, they wrote, "To ensure the safety and stability of the family assets, the petitioners, the biological daughter Claire, request the court appoint emergency guardianship, granting the petitioner full authority to manage the subject's assets and bank accounts." The wording was cold and clinical, like an audit report. Each line of black ink felt like a cut. Under the attachments, there was a name I could not ignore. Medical certification. Dr. Peter Lynn, DDS. I frowned. DDS is Doctor of Dental Surgery. A dentist, not a psychiatrist. I remembered the name. In 2016, when I was still consulting for the DOJ, I had read the disciplinary file on Dr. Peter Lynn, who had his license revoked for falsifying prescriptions for controlled substances and forging medical certifications in an insurance case. And now he appeared in my diagnostic paperwork, like a blunt scalpel being reused. I opened my laptop and accessed the California Dental Board license database. The red line appeared immediately. License revoked, March 18th, 2017. And right below it, subject involved in falsified medical documentation case under investigation by DOJ. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, and smiled softly. Clearly, they did not only want to strip my dignity, they wanted to legitimize it with forged papers. I pulled Isabel's photo from my wallet and placed it beside the file. See, now they use the law itself to bind me. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, dividing the room into light and shadow, like an operating table splitting patient and surgeon. I opened the old file cabinet and took out a dossier labeled Case Lexington 04, Fraudulent Certification Peter Lynn. The pages were yellowed, but enough to prove that the man had served as a false witness in at least 3 cases. I carefully placed them in my black leather briefcase and clipped in a copy of Claire's letter. When the wind tapped the window frame, I heard Judge Lowe's words from the courtroom echo in my head. The court will examine the reliability of the accompanying medical evidence. I smiled. Reliability? They had just handed me the evidence to dismantle their entire case. I opened the recorder and in a low, measured voice said, April 14th. I, Jonas Marwick, received a petition for emergency guardianship signed by Claire and Grant Thorne. The attached medical evidence is from Dr. Peter Lynn, whose license was revoked in 2017. This is the opening of the counterfile. I saved the file as Evidence 01, Guardianship Fraud. Before turning out the light, I looked out the window. The city lay in fog, sirens drifting in the distance, cold and hollow. In the dark, I heard Isabel's memory. If they do not know when to stop, you must teach them using their own laws. I nodded. This time I will operate on my family, starting with a disbarred dentist. And so the operation began. No scalpel, no blood. Only signatures, data, and a silence sharper than any blade. 4 days after sealing the Isabel Fund file, I drove back toward San Francisco. On the passenger seat lay a red envelope marked IF 2224 CLM Walsh, and behind me, the old black briefcase I had carried to DOJ hearings. Before leaving, I stopped at Redwood Private Bank in downtown Sonoma. 3 days earlier, I had signed an escrow to sell the 5-acre east parcel of the vineyard land outside the main rows, planted only with alfalfa and a few experimental vines. The buyer, an organic farmer, paid $1.1 million in cash, closing within 5 days. I had meant to keep that lot as a memento, but now it had become new lifeblood for the final operation of my life. I wired all of it into Marwick Recovery Trust, so when the time came, it would strike cleanly. No loans, no investors, no debts. I knew I was about to begin the biggest surgery of my life, replacing the heart of an entire system built on deceit. The Citadel Apex Capitol building stood on Montgomery Street, its height matching the arrogance of the financial district. I was escorted to a glass conference room on the 42nd floor, overlooking the San Francisco Bay, where fog slid in like a gray bandage. There a man rose when he saw me. Jim Callahan, he smiled, half polite, half wary. I've heard your name for years, Jonas Marwick. DOJ's Scalpel, the blade that leaves no blood, I replied calmly. Now I'm just a father trying to cut a tumor out of his family. Jim laughed softly, pouring coffee. You came at the right time. The Silver Mesa loan is in default. We're about to move into recovery. I know, I said, placing the envelope on the table, and I want to purchase the entire debt. His brow tightened. All of it? The nominal value is $5 million, but with interest and penalties, it's over 6.3. I'm not negotiating, I said, sliding across the certified bank draft I'd prepared. I ask only one thing. The buyer's name stays confidential. Jim studied me, his expression shifting from surprise to respect. You still work the same way. No rush, no noise, just precision. I learned from the ones I used to dissect. Sometimes silence is the most painful way for a man to realize he's dying. We signed the documents in the cold glass room. As the pen hit the final page, Jim turned to me. This debt transfer will finalize within 14 days. After that, you'll officially be the creditor of Thorne and Brooks Development, meaning Grant Marwick. I nodded. Good. Seal the transaction with this. I pulled from my briefcase an old brass seal engraved with the words, Justice Seal, Marwick Recovery Trust. Jim raised an eyebrow. You've kept that since your DOJ days? No, I said. I made it last night. To mark that justice this time won't come from a courtroom, but from the one who was betrayed. He nodded, pressing the seal into red wax. When the molten layer spread under the light, it glowed like coagulated blood. I looked at it, heart steady, not from fear, but from knowing the operation had begun. Jim gathered the files and said quietly, Grant won't know you're the creditor until the foreclosure notice arrives. Good, I said. I want him to open that letter at dinner, a dinner just like the night he humiliated me. Jim chuckled. Still your signature move. Let them read their own verdict. No scalpel needed, I replied, just a signature. When I left the building, wind from the bay blew hard, carrying salt in the air. I looked up at the mirrored windows reflecting the setting sun, the light bronze and heavy like the red wax on the seal. In that moment, I realized I had reversed the entire table. From the senile man needing guardianship, I had become the supreme creditor, the one holding the fate of those who once mocked me. That evening in the vineyard cellar, I opened my leather notebook and wrote the day's final line. Operation completed Phase 1. The artificial heart has been installed. The patient doesn't yet know he's living on a machine. I blew out the lamp, leaving the cellar bathed in the faint amber of the cooling wax. Justice Seal. Monday morning, the Marin County Courthouse lit up again. The atmosphere was entirely different from the first day I had entered with my black briefcase. Today I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Avery Hayes. Across from me was Claire, my daughter, her face pale, her eyes swollen and red. Beside her sat Grant, wearing the same familiar mask of confidence. He thought this hearing was just a procedure, that the old father-in-law would crumble under medical evidence and forged documents. He didn't know the operating table had been turned. Judge Lowe struck the gavel to open the session. Marin County Court, Civil Guardianship Case, number 45-2317. All parties present. Avery rose. Your Honor, before we begin the argument, we have supplementary evidence approved by the District Attorney's Office. Permission to submit. Lowe frowned. What is it, Ms. Hayes? Avery opened her case and placed a thick file on the witness table. This is a warrant, an emergency arrest order for dentist Peter Lynn on charges of perjury and medical fraud. It bears the signature of the Marin County District Attorney. The courtroom erupted. Peter Lynn, the man Claire and Grant had hired to certify my temporary incapacity, sat in the back row, his face drained of color. 2 deputies approached and cuffed him in front of everyone. I only did what they asked, Peter cried. The judge slammed the gavel. Order! Grant shot up. This is fabricated. They're staging this. Avery didn't look at him. She pulled out papers, her voice calm and firm. Exhibit A. Loan agreement between Thorne and Brooks and Citadel. Apex Capital. Loan now in default. Legal creditor is Marwick Recovery Trust. Exhibit B. Internal email chain between Grant Marwick and Walsh Holdings regarding the transfer of funds from the Isabel Foundation. Exhibit C. wire transfers of $150,000 and $80,000, signed by Claire Marwick. Exhibit D, prosecutor's report confirming misuse of charitable funds for personal gain. Each page appeared on the projector. Numbers glowed under the lights, colder than the sound of the gavel. Grant stammered, shouting, "That's a misunderstanding. I was just reinvesting for the foundation." Avery turned toward him. "Then why did the investment flow back into Walsh Holdings, the same company where you're listed as a hidden shareholder?" Silence. Judge Lowe looked down at the file, then turned to Claire. "Were you aware of these transactions?" Claire lowered her head. Her voice cracked. "I just signed what Grant told me. I didn't know my mother's name was being used to launder money." Grant grabbed her arm, but she pulled away, tears spilling down her cheeks. The courtroom fell completely silent. The hum of the air conditioner mixed with the faint tapping of the judge's pen like a countdown clock. Lowe sighed. "The court will recess for 15 minutes to review the new evidence. Mr. Marwick, I must say, this case has completely changed direction." I rose, looking straight at Grant. He tried to hold his defiant stare, but sweat beaded on his forehead. I said nothing. I only placed my hand on the black briefcase that held my leather notebook, the one whose last written line from last night still read, "The operation reaches the open heart stage." As the officers led Peter Lynn past the benches, he turned to me, stammering, "You set me up." I replied quietly, "No, you just ran into the blade yourself." Claire collapsed, her sobs echoing through the chamber. The room stood still. They no longer looked at me as a feeble old man in need of guardianship, but as the Scalpel, the one who had just exposed the disease, festering beneath the skin of a family. Judge Lowe struck the gavel again. "Court is in recess. When we return, we will determine who truly needs protection." 3 weeks after the Marin trial, San Francisco was soaked in a steady rain. I sat in Avery Hayes's office, once stacked high with legal files, now holding only 2 folders on the walnut table, a notice of default and a proof of assignment. Avery slid them toward me, her voice calm. "Citadel Apex has officially completed the debt transfer. From this point forward, all collateral belonging to Grant Marwick falls under the authority of Marwick Recovery Trust." I looked at the red imprint of the Justice seal on the front page and nodded. "File the foreclosure today." Avery replied, "Already done. Submitted electronically to the San Francisco County Asset Office. The formal notice will reach Grant by tomorrow morning." Outside, the rain tapped against the glass, like the final countdown of a verdict he had written for himself. 2 weeks later, the Federal Court of Northern California issued its ruling. Grant Marwick was convicted on 3 counts: financial fraud, money laundering, and misuse of charitable funds. The evidence Avery and I submitted formed a flawless chain of traceability: internal emails, Citadel contracts, and falsified transfers from the Isabel Foundation. The verdict was read in a courtroom packed with reporters. The judge stated plainly, 10 years in prison, with no parole for the first 7. Grant bowed his head, stripped of the arrogance he once flaunted in Presidio Heights. When the officers cuffed him, the flash of cameras illuminated his face, pale, hollow, the same mask he had worn for years now shattered. Claire sat trembling in the back row. Avery leaned close to whisper. She accepted a plea deal, 3 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, specifically at the Alzheimer's Center in Marin, and full restitution of $230,000, stolen from the Isabel Fund. I was silent for a long while. "And the house?" Avery replied. "Foreclosure in 15 days. They can keep personal belongings, but all property transfers to Marwick Recovery Trust." I looked down at the documents, the numbers, the lines, the pages of evidence. Cold, clinical, yet to me, they were the final heartbeat of a justice brought back to life. I felt no joy, no triumph, only emptiness, like a surgeon finishing a long, brutal operation, the patient alive but the soul not quite whole. A week later, the Los Angeles Times ran a front-page story. Former DOJ agent turned Scalpel on family fraud. The article read, "A retired Department of Justice investigator uses his own forensic skills to expose a family's financial conspiracy, leading to the son-in-law's conviction and the daughter's restitution order." The photo showed me in the Sonoma vineyard, evening light on my shoulder, the iron gate behind me closed. The article ended with my words, "I did not cut out of anger. I cut so the healthy part could still heal." That night, I returned to the old cellar beneath the vineyard and lit a candle before Isabel's photograph. I placed the LA Times copy on the table, then opened my leather notebook and wrote the final line of this chapter. Operation complete. The patient, Justice, revived, but the scar remains. The wind drifted through the cellar, carrying the smell of wet earth. I looked up at Isabel's picture. The candlelight shimmered on her gentle smile, calm as if she knew that what had been stolen had finally been restored. 6 months after the Marin trial, summer returned to the hills of Sonoma. The morning fog lifted slowly, revealing rows of vines stretching straight toward the base of the hill. The hum of a wind turbine drifted faintly across the valley. Everything seemed peaceful enough that, without the leather notebook on the table, no one would believe this place had once been a battlefield. I had sold everything, the Presidio Heights villa, my shares in Marwick Consulting, even the old Audi Isabel I used to drive. Every cent was transferred into the Isabel Foundation, refilled to continue funding scholarships for medical students. No more hidden expenses, no more names like Walsh in the transaction logs. The fund was clean again, just as Isabel had wanted. If there's still someone left to heal, make sure the money flows through the right vein. I had also established a separate trust for Noah, my only grandchild. The paperwork read, "Funds may be released only when the beneficiary turns 25 and proves they've earned a living helping others." I wanted the boy to grow up unshadowed by his parents' mistakes, to understand that money cannot save a soul, only responsibility can. Each morning I still brewed coffee and opened the window to watch sunlight fall across the vines. The light glimmered off an old wine bottle, one Isabel had labeled by hand. Sometimes I thought I could hear her voice from the porch. "Jonas, did you ever wonder if justice gets tired too?" I had wondered, and realized justice doesn't tire. Only people do, when they carry it too long. One afternoon, as I was filing foundation records, the door opened quietly. Claire stepped in, thinner now, but no longer hiding behind pretense. She stood for a long moment before whispering, "I don't know where to start." I set down my pen. "From the truth, same as always." She nodded, tears rising. "I've been working at the Alzheimer's Center for 6 months. Every time I touch a patient, I think of Mom. They forget everything, but they still know who treats them with kindness. I'm beginning to understand what she was trying to teach." I stayed silent, then reached into a drawer and set a white envelope on the table. Inside is 3 months' rent and a bus pass, not because you need it, but to remind you that every journey, no matter how long, begins with an honest step. She took it with trembling hands, tears falling onto the envelope. "Do you ever regret it?" "Yes," I said, "every time I've had to use a blade. And now I've stitched it closed." She nodded, bowed slightly, and left. When the door clicked shut, the room returned to silence. I watched her silhouette fade among the vines, turning color. I didn't know if she would ever come back, but I knew this much. For the first time in years, Claire had learned the greatest lesson of all. Justice isn't about defeating others. It's about preserving the human part of oneself. I turned back to the table and opened my leather notebook, the ledger of my life. 10,412 entries. Investigations, betrayals, tears. I read through them, feeling myself grow younger, then older with every line. I wrote one final entry, slow and deliberate. Entry 10,412. Justice is not noise. It's a balance restored. I set the pen down. Evening light poured through the window, stretching across the desk like a stream of gold. From the corner, a soft jazz tune played. Autumn in New York, Isabel's favorite. I looked at her framed photo, the faint smile, the eyes still warm. I kept my promise, I whispered. Not the one about revenge, but the one about protecting justice. Your part, I've made clean. My part, I've learned to forgive. Outside, the wind stirred the vineyard, leaves brushing together like the long sigh of a fading summer. I closed my eyes. In that moment, there was no gavel, no red wax, no camera flash, only the perfect silence of a world finally balanced again. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood or called weak because you chose silence, remember this story. True justice doesn't shout. It arrives through signatures, documents, and the quiet resolve of someone who refuses to let faith be buried. Jonas Marwick didn't win with money, nor with vengeance. He simply balanced what was broken, with knowledge, with truth, and with the courage to face his own family. In the end, he understood. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's refusing to let the wound dictate the rest of your life. If you've ever stayed silent out of dignity, stood alone among those who no longer believe in what's right, leave a single. In the comments, so I'll know you still believe in quiet justice. And if you believe true justice doesn't need a gavel, only a heart scale set back to its rightful place. Hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story, where ordinary people, through honesty and silence, find their own balance again. Share where you're watching from, because sometimes one believer in justice is enough to change the small world around them.